this hearing. So I recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Kinzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel for joining us today. You have all great reputations. Your work precedes you, and we're excited to have you here with us. Prior to the 2016 election, Russia engaged in one of the most sophisticated information operations to date against the United States. Regardless of your opinion of the Mueller report, and reading the first part of that and seeing the depth of Russian attempts is eye-opening to be involved in this election, as well as elections in other parts of the world. This was not the first time that Russia's used disinformation or malign influence to interfere in the democratic process of Western society, and I guarantee it will not be the last. Russian trolls will amplify any message that seeks to divide Western democracy and sow discord and chaos. From supporting Code Pink and fascist groups in the United States to spreading anti-European Union and anti-NATO messages across Europe, Vladimir Putin's goal is to divide the bond that holds democratic nations together. As long as Putin's hold on power remains unchallenged, he will continue to meddle in Western democracy. I believe that we must go on the offensive. While Vladimir Putin won a sham re-election and will be in office until 2025, the State Duma is slated to have an election in 2021. That means that the United States has just over 2 years to highlight how Putin's corrupt tactics of stolen money from the Russian population devastated their economy and ostracized their nation from the West. From an economic standpoint, Russia's GDP of $1.65 trillion is dwarfed by that of the United States and the European Union, which sits around the $40 trillion mark. However, in far-off places like Venezuela, Syria, Ukraine, Georgia, and across the Baltic and Balkan regions, Russia can use little capital to extract unproportionate pressure. Take Ukraine, for example, where Russian propaganda targeted a joint U.S.-Ukrainian training exercise, claiming that American troops were going to provoke protests across Ukraine to interfere in their electoral process. While this operation was easily debunked, it shows how the Russians use a handful of hackers to spread lies through social media. However, other operations take decades of planning and complex support networks to execute. It's been almost 25 years since the Dayton Peace Agreement ended the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, Russia has used this time to support nationalist politicians within the republic, the main belligerents of the Bosnian War that employed genocide and killed over 100,000 people. Last October, Bosnia held legislative elections. Since they have been unable to form a government given disagreements between pro-Western political parties and the nationalist Serb parties over what the relationship in Bosnia should have with NATO. Staunch anti-NATO sentiment and threatened secession from Bosnia has been the staple of the Russian-backed alliance of the independent Social Democrats who have in effect been blocking the government formation over NATO accession. The Europeans have abandoned Bosnia, and the United States cannot carry all the weight. If we want to counter Russian malign operations, we must do so in conjunction with our European allies. We must show Bosnia and other nations being tempted by Putin that Western democracy is a far better option than the tyrannical Russian system. Examples like Bosnia and Ukraine show why holding a hearing to expose Russian malign influence is so important. And I want to put a bit of an emphasis on having recently met with representatives from the Balkan region, from all areas. Every one of them mentioned, without exception, that the United States is basically the only partner standing strong with them against the Russians. And that is not our backyard. That is Europe's backyard. Europe has a responsibility to step up and do more as well. This cannot be a U.S.-only operation, but we are happy to lead with our European friends. And I think lastly, I'll say this. Part of exposing Russian disinformation is understanding that if you see a news report or a media report that seems way too crazy, it probably is. Many of us here have been involved in or had written articles about us by Russian trolls that are then posted by Sputnik or RT and retweeted multiple times until it becomes mainstream. By the way, did you know that I helped create ISIS, according to some RT story that was put out there? So that said, understanding the idiocy of some of the stuff you read is the first step to pushing back against Russian disinformation, because without that, they have no other weapon. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I now recognize the Ranking Member for 5 minutes, Mr. Kinzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you all for being here. Ms. Zaro, I just want to say that you are heroic in what you're doing, and I know that it's difficult. I know that it's not fun. And I know that the easiest thing to do would be to walk away and just say you did your piece. But I appreciate you being here and continuing to stand strong in the face of a really tiny man, as Dr. Kagan pointed out. Mr. Ambassador, you're correct, too, in talking about ambiguity. I think the reality is Russia tried to interfere in the 2016 election. We can have debates about, what the result was of that. We may disagree on that, but there was no doubt there was interference. And it's going to happen to both parties eventually. It's all about creating instability. It's all about creating doubt. And it's something that we have to be very clear about, because lack of clarity leads to Dr. Kagan's point about, well, who knows what's true? And then if who knows what's true, you're like, I'll just watch, whatever's on TV and not care, and still get fed this disinformation. So thank you all for your testimonies. Dr. Kagan, I want to ask you about disinformation and any advantages or disadvantages we have. When we do Radio Free Europe, for instance, or Radio Free America, we tell the truth on that. And sometimes that truth isn't pretty to our own system of governance. And telling the truth, I think, is the right thing, but that can be a disadvantage when Vladimir Putin puts out disinformation. So yes, it's true that Vladimir Putin is tiny in stature, for instance, right? That's something important to know, that he's stealing money from his people, getting that information out there. But it's not true that Bashar al-Assad defends Christians and is the hero of Christian civilization, and Vladimir Putin is a defender of Christianity against radical Muslims, as we hear. He's just a violent man that wants power. So when it comes to us countering with our own information, what are disadvantages and advantages we have, and how do we do that better? Because again, if you put a disinformation campaign against a true information campaign, this disinformation is going to be more powerful. But we don't want to get in the lying game either, so how do we do that?
Well, Congressman, I think you've put your finger on a big part of the advantage that we have, which is that the truth actually favors us. He has to tell lies in order to make anything look good for himself. He has an economy the size of Australia's, and it is not even a real economy. It is a kleptocracy which is dysfunctional and which harms the Russian people. The Russian standard of living is dropping. Russian health is dropping. The demography is terrible. Russia's in a terrible, disastrous situation. That truth is an advantage for us. We, on the other hand, are a vibrant, thriving society with the largest economy in the world and great freedoms and the ability to have a lot of civil discord. That is a tremendous advantage for us. I think it comes down to how we tell our own story. And I think that we have been so focused on ripping each other apart that the message that we are sending to the world is that we're awful and that no one should copy us, no one should want to join us, no one should want to work with us. And I don't attribute that to any individual in government. I think it's across the board the nature of our argumentation. So I think our advantage is the story that we actually have to tell. The disadvantage is the nature of our discourse buries that story.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, I look at, we haven't done a good job of selling our side. We assumed we won the Cold War and that it was 100% agreed that this was the best way of life. We can put up a $40 trillion economy between the United States and Europe versus $1.6 or $7 trillion economy of Russia, but that doesn't sell it because Vladimir Putin uses ethnic tensions now. And ethnic tensions actually are more compelling than saying you get a new iPhone or you get a little bit more money. The reality is this is the best time to be alive. I mean, you have any information you want here. We're comfortable. The United States of America, at least, and most of Europe, doesn't worry about an attack on a daily basis besides maybe a cyber attack. But yet we're more miserable than I think we've ever been in our life. And I think getting our heads around what we have and what we are and projecting that is how we won the Cold War. It wasn't necessarily a military buildup. It was an idea war. That's how we're going to defeat radical terrorism, by giving an idea war to show what possibility lays out there. Massaro, do you have anything to add to that? I only have 20 seconds left, but I want to give you a chance to add to the information side of that. You're good. I like that. All right. Well, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.